everyone. Welcome up to the Vinyl Attic, where we love to talk about records, and we're talking about the 100 albums that should be in your collection, the 100 sort of must-haves, at least according to me. And we're talking about something very near and dear to my heart today. Live albums have a very important part in recorded music. Live albums have launched the careers of artists that had small followings. You know, last time we were talking about Cheap Trick and Peter Frampton. Live albums have been documents of artist progression. I think all those Grateful Dead live albums, for example. Live albums bring you into the room with an artist. I think Jeff Buckley live at Cine is one of the best, and that's only an EP. But this is one that is sort of head and shoulders above all live albums, where you feel literally like you're in the room with someone who is so celebrated. And that's the July 1966 album Sinatra at the Sands, recorded at the Sands in Las Vegas, where he basically kind of ran the room for a long time. This album comes out when Sinatra is at his peak. 1966 was a huge year for Frank Sinatra. I mean, we think of the 60s as the 60s, but he had an album out at the beginning of the year, Strangers in the Night, that went to number one. The song went to number one. Jimi Hendrix even riffed on Strangers in the Night. The year ended with his album That's Life, which is probably one of the signature songs of Frank Sinatra. So when we think of the 60s, 1966 was also the year of Revolver and Pet Sounds and the Byrds' Fifth Dimension and, all the psychedelic explosion that was happening. But this album, this album is so great. There's multiple things that make this album great. One is his band is Count Basie's orchestra. Count Basie, he'd done an album in 1964 with Count Basie called It Might As Well Be Swing, and arranged by Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones, who recently passed. Quincy Jones, who launched so much great music, including Michael Jackson's Thriller. Obviously, that's the Quincy Jones most famous piece. But you bring these folks together in this double live album, bringing the Rat Pack to the public, and this is Sinatra firing on all four cylinders. And in fact, there's a part in here where he says, there's a rumor going around that I recently turned 50. That's a dirty communist lie, direct from Hanoi. So not only is it like Sinatra, in full effect, but it's also kind of tied into what was happening at the time. The arrangements on this are so swinging. I mean, it's just insane to think about that your band is Count Basie's orchestra, arranged by Quincy Jones. It's just so crazy. The place that he was playing was of note, the Sands. So the Sands was sort of the beginning of moving the Las Vegas Strip from Fremont to the Strip, where we associate it now with the MGM Grand and all the huge hotels. When people go to Las Vegas, most people don't go to Fremont anymore. They just go to the Strip. So the Sands opens up in 1952 by maybe some people who are associated with the mob, and is there until 1996. So if you know the Las Vegas Strip, where the Venetian Hotel is with the gondolas, that's where the Sands was, if you need to orient it. And the Sands played a significant role in the desegregation of Las Vegas. Sinatra was brought in as performing there. He was kind of the house performer at the Sands. And there was a performance by Nat King Cole, who was the first black artist who was allowed to perform there and stay there. And Sinatra noticed that he was never in the restaurant. And they're like, why can't we have Nat King Cole, come eat in the restaurant? And the owner said, we don't allow coloreds, as he called it, in the restaurant. And Sinatra said, oh no, that's not going to happen. So he invited Nat King Cole and Harry Belafonte to come have dinner with them to say, we're integrating this place. And then Harry Belafonte went and walked into the casino and sat down at the blackjack table. And the security people are like, this is supposed to be white only. And Sinatra is like, you're gonna let Harry Belafonte play some blackjack. But then a little bit later, they got Sammy Davis Jr. in, and also similar things happened, and Sammy Davis Jr. was allowed to stay, but he noticed a black couple trying to eat at the restaurants and coming to the casino, and they wouldn't let it do it. And Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. were like, yeah, this doesn't happen anymore. We're going to have everybody walk out of here, and we're going to shut this place down unless you let people of color come, as they were called in those days, colored people, come into the Sands, eat, stay, perform, and gamble. And that was really the beginning of the desegregation of what was a very segregated place, racially segregated. You don't think of Las Vegas as being, kind of a racist Jim Crow spot, but that was America in 1960. And there were other artists that followed, and the Beatles in 1964 and 1965 refused to play in places that segregated the audience. They wanted the black kids and the white kids to be able to sit together. But this really starts with Sinatra. Sinatra doesn't have the best history around racial justice, but one of the people he befriended at the Sands in the late 1950s was a young Senator John F. Kennedy, and he promoted Kennedy's candidacy. He got the Sinatra seal of approval, and that was for them hanging out at the Sands and I imagine talking about the civil rights movement. So there is all this history there at the Sands. But one of the things that's great, so the music on this is just so swinging, but what makes it great is Sinatra's presence. When he comes out, there's this big introduction, a man and his music. This is the music of Frank Sinatra, and he comes out, and the crowd roars. I mean, it's inside a casino, so you're not in a stadium or a theater. And he just says famously, "Who let all these people into my room?" Because, the Sands was sort of his place. So you immediately feel like you're in the room with Frank. In the middle of it, after about 8 songs, there's a section called Tea Break, which essentially is Frank doing stand-up comedy. He's telling the story of his career. He's talking about Dean Martin, how drunk Dean is. He says, if we have an Olympic team for drinking, Dean will be the coach. He talks about Sammy Davis Jr., says Sammy Davis comes in to clean up, which is, somewhat of a joke on Sammy Davis being the black guy who's allowed to come into the Sands. It's just this hilarious little bit. He's making fun of drunk people in the audience. He's making fun of himself. And then at the end, he says, I better get back to the music before I turn 51. You are there in the room with him. And I wanted to say, besides this record is just such an exciting moment in the middle of all the crazy things that are happening in the 60s. I mean, there's a great part in here where he talks about Dean Martin's been stoned more than the U.S. embassies, because what was happening in the mid-60s is a lot of U.S. embassies were being attacked by the locals, including having rocks thrown at them. And the crowd laughs and applauds, and he says, I don't know if you're applauding because you think Dean Martin should be stoned more or the U.S. embassies should be stoned more. It's just a weird, beautiful moment of the old world of the 50s dropped into the middle of the swinging 60s, and it just goes together perfectly. So one little story. So Frank dies in May of 1998, and it was, for those of us that were fans, I never saw him live. In fact, my friend Tim protested his show in Atlanta because Frank had played in South Africa. So he was at an anti-apartheid protest outside the Frank Sinatra show at the Omni. I definitely agree with that, but it would have been nice to have seen him. I never saw him, but when he died in May of 1998 here in Portland, there's a bar that I used to hang out at that I will probably be hanging out tonight called the Sandy Hut. Sandy Hut had the best jukebox in town. It had on it was a CD jukebox, had Sinatra's Greatest Hits and Sinatra Live at the Sands, both discs, because it's a double album. So there was a lot of Frank on this jukebox at the Sandy Hut. So I got dressed up. I lived not too far from there. So I got dressed, put a suit and a tie on, got a cab to the Sandy Hut, around 5 or 6 p.m., and immediately loaded up the jukebox with all 3 CDs of Sinatra music. So nothing else was going to get played that night. And then started ordering Jack and Cokes Jack Daniels is Sinatra's favorite. Jack and Cokes were his drink. Started ordering Jacks and Cokes, listening to Sinatra. And all these people, all these like Portland hipsters, are like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "Sinatra's dead," and they're like, "Oh my god." So so only Sinatra's played, including the Live at the Sands, including the Tea Time where he's just riffing on drunk Dean Martin. And apparently at the end of the night, which I do not remember, I was standing on the bar singing "Send in the Clowns," which Sinatra has a beautiful version of. Somehow someone took me home, tucked me in my bed. I don't know who that person was. I just know I woke up in my bed, in my clothes, with a really great memory of how Sinatra really kind of brought the swing back. This is the era of swingers and lounge music, so a lot of people were rediscovering or discovering for the first time Sinatra in the late 90s, and it was a beautiful way to say goodbye to this guy. But this, there's so much of Frank, but this album brings you into the room. I just highly recommend it. Okay, I've been working my way through the Rolling Stone, their list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, and I'm almost done with it. There's a shit ton of Kanye West on this 500 list, and there is apparently not any Robin Trower. So next time we are going to go into classic rock mode full on and talk about the Robin Trower album Bridge of Sighs. And I have a lot to say about that great record too. But until then, the chairman of the board, Sinatra matters. If you got an ounce of swagger in you, thank Sinatra. Before there was Jagger, there was Frank Sinatra. Sinatra matters. This album matters so much. Look at that man. The music matters, you matter. So let's talk about it.